Thanks everyone for attending. This will be the first, well, actually it's the second video that we're doing. Our first session like this was an introduction to what we call the whole enchilada, or the great governance process between all of us. And we thought it'd be a good idea to follow that up with unique sessions for different parts of the process. And I'm happy to share this session with my good friend Mark Anielski, who is, I would say, the expert in the area of well-being and has literally written books about it. And I don't think there's any shameless plugs for the books in the presentation, but I'm sure you could Google Mark and see his work after this. We have some people in the room who we obviously know, but some that we don't. And we would like for this session to be very interactive. So I will be looking for people to chime in if they have any questions. Mark and I would be happy to address the questions when they come up. Seeing as we have a smaller group, and we can stay a little bit more intimate than if we had dozens and dozens of people. So with that, I'm just going to get into the presentation. With intent, I called this what is well-being and why should I care? We're going to try to illustrate why municipalities should be caring about well-being and how they can make it very meaningful to their operations. And then we'll build this session with the thought that it would lead into the next couple of sessions that we'll have on strategic planning and priority-based budgeting. So if you saw the first session that we did, this is what our suggested process would look like, and all of the pieces of the puzzle. And in our first conversation, we shared that we thought you could start at any piece, start with any piece of this. So we wouldn't want to suggest that you wait for, say, wanting to do strategic planning first, or you know that your cycle is coming up for budgeting, so you wanted to wait to start strategic planning. I'll actually later go in a different direction with that advice, but this is what you'll start seeing regularly from this group is this process. So Mark, I'm going to throw it over to you, and maybe you could just share for the group your definition of well-being, and maybe expand a little bit upon what it means to you.
Well, thanks, Kelly. Thanks for this session. I just a little bit about my background. I spent my first 13 years of my career in the Alberta government in the finance ministry. The last 4 years, actually establishing a outcome-based approach to governance and budgeting. So that was back in the mid 1990s, and it's still going. So that provides you some context. So I'm quite familiar with writing or preparing large budgets like Alberta's budget, which now is about a $50 billion budget. And so the question arose when we were developing a framework for accountability is, how do you align, the spectrum from inputs all the way to quality of life? And that's really the algorithm that you're trying to navigate. And it was only later when after I left the finance ministry that I started to, as I was teaching business students at the U of A and down in the Seattle area, that the language we were using in business and finance, I thought must have had some origins. I mean, there's the etymological dictionary, which was my favorite online program. So as I started to look at alternative ways of accounting for quality of life and in the indicators, it became obvious to me that we would have to inquire into the origins of words like wealth and health and competition and even the word economy. So as I did a probe into these the origin of the words, I've found that the word wealth actually comes from a 13th century Old English word meaning the conditions of well-being. So wella, W-E-L-A, means well-being, and the letters TH means the conditions of something. Now the word health actually refers to wholeness. So the condition of wholeness of, the individual. Ecology means basically the well-being of nature. And the word economy means the wise stewardship of the household. So that's what actually economy means. So putting this all together, it struck me that we were actually not measuring the well-being of Albertans or Canadians per se, even though we may believe we are through census and other things. And we weren't certainly measuring the word happiness, which in Greek means well-being of your spirit, of your soul, from Aristotle's original definition, oidaimonia. So this all kind of comes together nicely into a beautiful recipe book, well, potentially recipe book, where we're navigating. What are we navigating with our compass? In the individual pursuit of happiness, we're all hopefully trying to balance what we know as wealth being financial wealth. That's what our financial planners tell us, and our treasurers and finance ministers and CFOs tell us is wealth. But that's balanced with the word health, and the key attribute of a happy life actually is relationships. It's about 40% of your happiness. So the scientists say is built on relationships. So let's say well-being is now is ultimately the North Star, or in terms of our own compass and the compass of municipalities and governments, ideally.
So Mark, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball and have you, and maybe someone in the room could also expand upon this. I know when we get together as a group, we talk about relationships a lot. And I think myself, and I would throw it out there for someone to respond maybe, is that government in general seem to be losing their way in understanding that relationship piece. It seems to be we're just reporting back on numbers, and we get inundated with tax conversations. And I think the reason why your work is so meaningful and powerful in our current circumstances, we've had this time to maybe this forced pause and maybe rethink that relationship with our citizens, and hone in really on that word, is that this is a very powerful relationship in people's lives with their local municipality, and maybe that should be kind of our guiding post.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big question. Some people say, so are you suggesting that governments are responsible for my happiness? And I said, absolutely not. But remember, the word wealth means the conditions of well-being. So the fundamental question, I think, for governments is, what are we doing with respect to our programs and services that are enabling the pursuit of genuine happiness and well-being? And we should certainly be concerned about the distribution of well-being as experienced by citizens. So the fundamental question to me in any council meeting is, any decision, whether you're widening a road or you're deciding on another infill or a high rise densification, can't that well-being ROI question be in play? And I would argue absolutely can be in play. Whether it's been in play before, whether it's a scary thing, I don't think it's a scary thing. I think people are motivated. People make decisions on emotions. I mean, Kelly, you and I are spreadsheet guys. Like, we can do all the spreadsheet analysis we want. And I know I torment Ian about this. I can do all the full cost accounting I want on which burger I should buy on the way to Valley View. But at the end, I make a decision based on emotion and feeling. And so as an economist, I want to respect that. People have feelings about why they choose to live in a neighborhood, right? You might be able to define that algorithm if you ask enough questions, but we're not even asking the questions. And here we are, and we're about to conduct the next census for Canada. Now, if you look at the census form, which I have, there are no subjective well-being questions on the census. How much money do you make? How many people live in your household? Where are you? What sector are you employed in? How's the state of your house in terms of repairs? Right? Okay, those are good questions, and they are asked every 5 years. But I want to ask the well-being question now, today. How are we doing during COVID? And this slide shows the questions I'm asking, and the surveys we're conducting, and most of my work recently has been with First Nations. And this is an image of what they call the medicine wheel. And it's what Abraham Maslow actually learned from the Blackfoot in southern Alberta. He learned about the sacred hoop, that the individual, is comprised of mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical attributes. So what did Maslow do? He turned it into yet another British model of a pyramid. It's like, why are pyramids so important in our Western mindset versus a hoop, a circle, which creates a whole different kind of paradigm of governance and thinking. It's like, if your tire on your car is not balanced, you're going to have a wobbly ride. And I think the same is true with this image. So what are the questions about how I feel about my mental well-being? Well, these are questions I've pulled from the work by a positive psychologist. I'm an economist. I'm not a psychologist. So I have to rely on their research. And these are the questions they found are significant in terms of defining a person's well-being, including, on I put happiness and life satisfaction on the spiritual quadrant, because again, it's the well-being of your soul. How joyful do you feel? How much soul peace? I know those are tough questions. I want to ever ask you a question about how much peace you feel in your soul, Kelly. And on the emotional side, you have things like trust, belonging. Those are social capital assets, which are critical to that relational question. Trust and leadership, feeling about the environment. And then there's a whole bunch of physical attributes, from diet to your personal fitness, financial well-being. Do you feel you make enough money to meet your needs? Those are good questions. That can be complemented with how much income are you making a living wage, statistically, and
Right.
then a bunch of satisfaction questions with access to things like that municipalities provide, recreation, arts and culture, education. These are all programs and services that are already being provided. So we're going to ask, how satisfied are you with access to those? And those often are the lowest rated responses in my surveys, is the access questions, which is interesting.
Well, and key for me, Mark, is like when I look through this, I'm seeing, like you had mentioned, I'm seeing a municipality might, inject some of these pieces into a satisfaction survey after seeing the data that is provided by your work, right? And not every one of these will have a direct correlation with something that the municipality does. However, it's powerful information for them to have when they are making decisions in their own world, right? There's some that are obviously more direct than others, but just the data and knowing the pulse of your citizens in a different way will have, that's a lot of great data when making program decisions.
Yeah.
So, why should I care? I think I wanted to stress here that when we talk about great governance with intent, I feel that everybody, whether you're in government, whether you're running your own business, whether you're running a nonprofit, or even your own family, we all benefit greatly from knowing with crystal clear what our objective is, and it needs to be well understood by everyone who's making an effort towards achieving that ultimate goal. And for us in this group, we all feel that the big reason for being as a municipality is to provide that well-being for its citizens. And if that isn't something that you're always asking yourself, maybe you're distracted being asking the wrong questions, like I think Mark was suggesting before. Too often I see instances of asking again that tax question when we know the answer. I've seen it every time it's been asked, is citizens want more in the form of services, whether more bundles of services or better services, and they want to pay less. So if we know that, and it's probably something that we can't deliver, maybe we should stop asking that question and start thinking about these richer questions that will come up today.
Can I just comment on that? I think, in fairness, as a we're all taxpayers, and some of us have worked in government and been on the other side of delivering services. I think it's a fair expectation of citizens to know what value they're getting from the taxes they're paying on property or income. And I think governments actually do a pathetic job of reporting on value.
That's
Uh,
the key word for me, Mark.
and the word value means, actually in Latin, I mean, fussy here means to be worthy or strong. That's what word value means. So it's natural for me to go, yeah, why do we need a police helicopter floating in the sky like every night? Show me the return on investment. Of course, the police will go, what are you talking about, Mark? Return on investment? Yeah, like how many criminals did you catch last night? Or, to make my life better, because I'm motivated by better, and I want to make sure my neighbor is feeling better. Perhaps maybe that's a simple motivation. That's just one word, better, and used word best in there as well. So I think we have the ability to measure better and to map well-being across our neighborhoods, and then show the inequality perhaps in well-being, and then say, whoa, that's interesting. Why are some communities flourishing? Like life satisfaction is over the, off the charts, and in other areas it's terrible. And so what's going on? What's the narrative behind what's going on? And what do we learn from the communities that are flourishing by their own admission versus those who are lagging?
You talked about it earlier, that return on investment, right? So taxes for citizens, that's their investment. What are we getting out of that, right? So,
Yeah.
and value's key. I just quickly share here, like what does a well-being baseline from Mark's work provide us? Well, it gives the citizens perspective on where their current well-being lies for them personally. And then, we take that internally and we look at our own operations as a municipality, but also have intimate relationships with a lot of the community assets where we can have conversations with service delivery agents that might not be us on different creative ways to provide that well-being for citizens, maybe in partnership with someone else, right?
So I'll give you a simple, because I think in T accounts, because with my accounting background. So I just mentioned that we're, Canada's having its
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to jump onto this call in the next couple minutes. Go warm up my coffee.
Thanks. I wish I was warming up my coffee too. But I think, the way I look as an economist, if I was chief economist of the city of Edmonton, and Kelly, you and I have been economists in governments, is, we rely on that census data. We're waiting for it to come out, but it'll be 2 years before the census data comes out. And then we'll make all kinds of projections and forecasts of the economy called Edmonton or Alberta. But my argument is we can actually complement those objective statistics with well-being subjective statistics. And we can do that right away. We don't have to wait. And that creates an interesting, more comprehensive portrait, I think, of that will help people like economists guide council with, I think, better information.
So Mark, I love this slide because for me, and I want you to share with the group the story behind this, the work that's on the screen right now. For me, it just looked so different than other strategic planning efforts that I've done, where there's whiteboards around the room. And this is so visual and it's really telling a story, but I won't get into great detail. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this slide in front of us.
So this is the Opaskwayak Cree Nation in northern Manitoba in the Paw, which is about 5 hours north of Winnipeg, or 11 hours driving from Edmonton due east along the Saskatchewan River. So the chief, Christian Sinclair, who even says, the word chief is a colonizer's word. My title is Onigano, which means leader, and he's a former Canadian military sniper, so he knows war. And he bought my book, got my book in Vancouver when we were at an Indigenomics conference. And he said, I'm going to bring you to my community and I want you to help us navigate what you're writing about, this economy well-being. And he said, it totally resonates with our Cree teachings. We have sacred teachings that are still very much alive. And First Nations are my primary client. because I feel that AI I resonate with them. I understand a little bit about their way of looking at the world in terms of all of, and Cree or First Nations talk about all my relations. That's their economic model. You know, and nature is their teacher. The natural ecosystem. I'm a forester by profession too. Is everything in nature is relational, in harmony, not the model of an economics we were taught of scarcity, but actually abundance. So what this slide is showing is this is a community planning session they invited me to before COVID. This was 2020, I guess, just before COVID slammed us in March. And it's Michelle Buchholz, who's an illustrator from Vancouver, was there and just capturing the conversation. So we had a room of 300 people. Elders had a special table. I mean, that's how much they revere elders. Like they had a table. We as guests, we were the guests from afar, and we could sit in the back. And they captured this kind of image of the pathway to an economy of well-being. And the Opaskwayak now is the First Nation, if not the first government that has a well-being baseline akin to a well-being balance sheet. They are now embedding it into their budgeting process, which I'm helping them with. So it's the first one of its kind, and I know my friends at Finance Canada are also very interested in this pilot, because Canada too is looking at this idea of well-being based budgeting quietly, of course, because politically you don't want to be too far in front of your other friends and nations.
So for me, Mark, it just screams that relationship piece that we talked about earlier. And there's a lot of feelings that went into here. And for folks that are listening that are in municipal operations, I mean, I'm pulling out things like fairness and empathy, which, might be something that, aligns with your FCS department, your family community services. There's a piece in there about communications, and it seems like a theme to me. So of course, municipal government has a really powerful way to communicate with citizens. Lots of environment in there, and of course, whether it's recreation or land conservation, it's just peppered with municipal operations in there. So and what a visual representation. I just love it. So
I get really boring slides like this, right?
Yeah, and I think this one is just maybe a little bit of a repetition of that last slide that you had, but that was more about questions that were asked. I think this one segues nice into one of the next stages that we have for our processes, of course, that strategic planning, and ultimately building some goals that we want to achieve in a strategic plan. So for me, and maybe you can share how these might work their way into crafting of those goals, those long-term goals that we want to achieve, and then align our programs to.
Right. So what you see here is actually what I call the model I've developed is called the genuine wealth model. And of course, we already said that wealth means well-being, and genuine is a big word because it means basically you're aligned with the values of the community, right? Well, what are the values that define Edmontonians or Albertans? Big question. So this accounting system, basically imagine a spreadsheet with these five, one column you have these 5 capital assets, human and social cultural assets. Second column you have sub asset accounts like health, trust and belonging, land, built assets, infrastructure, and then financial assets. And then all the subsequent columns are statistics, data that you're pulling in from existing public sources, stats, can data, and then complemented ideally with another column on subjective well-being. So that's the spreadsheet. It's pretty robust. It's as anyone who can understand balance sheets or interpret them, most of us can't. I think Warren Buffett's probably one of the best at it because he knows how to look for value. is to sort of look at this snapshot. This is like a mirror. This is a portrait of ourselves, an image of ourselves in a mirror through a common set of criterion called well-being criterion. And from that data, it tells us something about ourselves. It's a narrative. There's a narrative that comes out. If I say my walk score is 85 out of 100, what does that mean? It means your community is super walkable. You don't actually have to get in a car, but if you're in Sherwood Park, it's like probably got a walk score of 35, which means you actually have to get in the car and go anywhere to get anything, including a coffee. So, those are some of the statistics that are in this kind of well-being assessment that then informs a conversation about capital and operating budgets. I think that is probably more robust, more informed,
Yeah.
less emotional. And you can tell citizens, hey, this is our inventory. This is who we are, good and bad, and great and deficits. And so all this data pops out at you. You can compare with your neighbors, provincial averages, national averages. You can look at suicide, look at who's got the lowest suicide in the country, on and on and on. It's really incredible data.
Sorry, I moved forward, but I actually want to, and I didn't tell Chris I was going to do this, but I wonder if Chris Fabian, who's joined us, and the founder and creator of Center for Priority-Based Budgeting, and now Resource X, and the priority-based budgeting expert, Chris, can you share with us here on this slide, in your work with priority-based budgeting and taking those strategic plans and goals and then using that information to then score and rank programs with folks, are you seeing similar areas here to what you encounter in your work, and that alignment piece to different goals that you've seen?
I mean, I was looking for the same thing and asking very similar question. I think that what's on the screen is very satisfying for completeness of what you would look for a healthy community. And then as I was kind of perusing, I was looking for the kind of things that communities we work with typically say in their own words. So they might talk about, we have a ton of communities right now who we are working with trying to address equity. And you see that in your social and cultural capital. We have communities obviously talking about public health and, well, the safety of their residents from a pandemic perspective. And you have then human capital in well-being and physical well-being and health, straightforwardly. The health of the economy or robustness, economic vitality. And you can start to get there in your financial capital and on and on. Working with Pittsburgh recently on their climate goals, and who Mark very familiar with, Grant Irvin, and you see a natural capital. So, I mean, very interesting. I've not seen it portrayed like this, but you see the types of things that cities we work with say are definitely represented here in your complete picture. It's really neat.
Yeah, I wanted to, thanks, Chris. I know Kirsten Goa just made a comment and said, one of my mentors, Marilyn Waring from New Zealand, amazing woman, feminist economist, said, I kind of blushed, said, I think Mark's model is the best I've seen anywhere in the world. And the reason I think she's saying that is this image, it came to me like 20 years ago. We were doing the Alberta Genuine Progress Indicator, and I'm trying to find a way of presenting, different data like GDP, life expectancy, all different kind of measurement units in a single image. And then I found this little thing called radar graph. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is worth $1 million. Like, if I can figure a way of portraying complex data in a simple image like this, decision makers are gonna love it, because it shows that, the land is deeply connected with their health and well-being. We know that intuitively. So if I can show you on a simple graphic that the state of the forest is whatever it is on a scale of 1 to 100, and the state of mental well-being is whatever it is, that tells me something about the relationship. I don't know exactly what it's telling me, but in the image, it shows me something very powerful. This is so this is the Opaskwayak Cree Nation's Wellbeing Index. We conducted the survey. We started in April, the outset of COVID, and then Chief Executive, CFO, and they said, we got to stop. Like, we're going to get terrible results, right? People are going to be depressed. COVID, they lost 30 members to COVID of an unreserved population of 3,500. And they are super. Now look at the results. Like the life satisfaction rating out of 10 maximum points is 7.54. Hope was 7.1. Joy, peace of soul. Yes, stress was high. You can see those numbers. But this is a response rate. About 15% of the population completed the survey, an online survey, completely voluntary. We stopped in April. We resumed in September. We had a sample size of 440 respondents from age 10 to 80. And the results were like, to me, they're just amazing. And you could see that this is just the average. Now I can break this down by age, sex, income, marital status, educational attainment, because of the back end, there's all the socioeconomic statistics. So I can tell you how youth are feeling versus, seniors, the elders. And the fact that life satisfaction would have ranked them, I told them they would rank behind Finland and Denmark in the World Happiness Rankings, ahead of Canada, which ranked 11th in 2019. And Canada's life satisfaction has dropped 19% during COVID, and it's 7 to 6.8, and it's 7.54 in Opaskwayak, with a community of poverty, low income, abuse, the social determinants are terrible, but there's something here that's worth a conversation.
So Mark, I want to share a little bit about what you and I sat down and we were geeking out, your term, not mine, with the data the other day. And I put on my 30 years in municipal governance myself, and at the staff level. I put that hat on when we were looking at the data. And do you remember when you talked about youth and seniors, and I was going in there looking for policy decisions or program decisions, and they were easily found by looking through that data. It was clear that, there was this disparity between what the youth and what the seniors were saying. So they're just, their go forward strategies for improving overall, they had to do more with the youth than they did with the seniors per se. And so that was part of their go forward discussions about those decisions that had to be made. They had to be made in the youth area, maybe more so than the elders. That said, we did see in the data that the elders were an important part of telling the story and telling their history and telling how they, as a municipality or as a First Nation, would leverage that pre-existing data that was there from their elders as they were making future decisions. So it was really powerful. My eyes were wide open, and I hadn't done it. I hadn't geeked out with you like that for a while. So thanks for that.
But the other point here in this data is, remember, I'm not telling them what to do about these statistics. This is for them. Begins the conversation. And I think that's a key part of this kind of work is that, we can come in and be the doctor, do the diagnosis, but I'm not offering counsel as to how to improve your neighborliness. You could see the numbers on trust in neighbors isn't very high. You're like, well, and they've like, well, that's, why that is, because we have feuding families. I'm like, yeah, right. I guess we have feuds in our families too, but so you sort of, it begs the question as to how much do we provide guidance to improvement, or does that come through the conversation then amongst the community members?
That's key with pretty much everything that we do. And me being a long-term strategic planner, it's a whole bunch of data and different tool sets than maybe you're used to, but ultimately, there's emotion that comes into play, and there's other things that you can base your decisions on. But the richness of this data is something that I think is very powerful and very unique. and very timely for helping to make those decisions. But you're right, they won't make the decisions themselves. It's just really powerful data.
Yeah. So this is a snapshot of the report, and I call it a state of well-being report. So it's kind of like your financial statements, but it's got the five asset classes broken down in the report. And you can see I borrowed from the Alberta Auditor General's icons of green, yellow, and red triangle, because I used to sit on the audit committee of the province, and it's hard. You're reviewing like all these ministry financial statements, and just show me, what are things good, or do we have this like huge red diamond saying? And so this is just based on my interpretation, and you can see on the right hand side. So you could say, well, the average happiness level is whatever, 7.12, but what's the percentage distribution of happy and very unhappy? And you see 3% would say they're very unhappy or unhappy with life. So that's important, because you look down that column, say feeling positive, I know it's even fuzzy for me. 46% of people are saying they have a lot of stress in their life. That's a lot, right? Those are big. I've colored those blue. Ability to handle life's challenges. 32% are having problems. 31% don't have enough energy for life. Those jump out at me. And so then, and then the physical. So this kind of data is, I think it's super cool, and we've only begun to, scratch the surface. So now I have to go in and brief every department head, right? I mean, this is like a national government. So you got health, of course, which is the dominant budget item, right? And then social services and child and family services. And, like, so how do we use this data, Mark? It's like, well, here it is. Here's your baseline. And this is your people reflecting in their own mirror of their experience.
Good segue, my friend. So, like Mark was saying, now what do you do with all of this data, right? And I think you have to then take a step back and just ask, what does it really tell us, right? So in my viewpoint, and I think what we feel as a team is this is really telling us, there's old school SWOT analysis. Well, this is a SWOT analysis on steroids, right? So it's telling us where we're strong, where we have some gaps. The storytelling is telling us, a bit of the community's aspirations. So where do they see themselves in the future? For Chris's work, like, this is hugely powerful data to help those internal resources when they're scoring programs, right?
Especially Chris, like engineers like Chris,
Yeah, maybe a lot of people might not know that Chris's background is engineering.
I'm very attracted to everything I'm hearing so far. It's been great.
So, and that's the relationship piece, right? It comes out. How does the community feel about their relationship with us? And again, back to that term value, this is where we can mine for where that greatest potential return is in value, right? And for folks that are going to be either listening today or watching this afterwards, for me, this slide was something we built when we were talking with City of Edmonton. And for those that aren't like the geography, we're a lot of us on the line today are from Edmonton in Alberta. So talking with City of Edmonton, we talked about well-being and working it into this great governance piece. And just long story short, my feeling and our feeling is the budget is actually the last thing that we do. And I don't know how many times I see a new council and the direction they're told by either a municipal government act of some sort or by their public or their colleagues is the most important thing they're going to do is pass a budget. Whereas I strongly believe that all of this work up front, the well-being baseline, the strategic planning, the work with Chris and priority-based budgeting, all of that forms the decisions that need to be made on mining for that value. The last thing that you do, the very last thing you do is then cost out and see what the ramifications are on your budget. And I know that there's limits that there's a limit to your the revenue that you have at your disposal. But then you can circle back and then look at that value again. And if you have to make tough decisions, it's based on that rich data that you have, and it's based on the well-being return for your citizens. So what this might look like, so these are just my words, and municipalities would have to make these words their own. But if we were looking at a strategic planning exercise with a council, and they had all that rich data and relationship conversations, et cetera, those feelings coming into a strategic planning session, a vision statement might start looking like our citizens experience conditions that support them in achieving their greatest joy in their lives, instead of, like, you know, the generic ones that you see, while municipality X is striving for a place where everyone can work, live, and play, or the word sustainability would be in there and it wouldn't be well defined. We wouldn't know what it means. Whereas this one is that it's really injects that feeling of well-being and that happiness that I think our citizens would be hoping that we would be have in our strategic plan. Of course, you're going to be aligning your effort and your programs towards achieving this. And like I said, municipal, this would be different for every municipality. It's important that you make it your own and you really listen to your own unique set of data and experience that you would have with your community. But it might start looking something like this. And then the next stage is, I talked to Chris about what goal statements might look like, right? So if we go back in that social area or that cultural area that is discussed in a well-being conversation, you might start seeing goal statements that are something like this: we will be socially connected, we'll be a socially connected community leveraging our social capital. And again, that would be unique. You might have some strong area in that is specific to your community, whether those be your trails or whether those be your natural areas or whatever, and make that specific to you. But this might be a goal that ends up showing up in your strategic plan, that you would align those programs to. And so, talking about programs, okay, here's the goal that we have in that social area about connectivity. And I just picked like 4 random programs that might show up in a municipality. And sorry for American people on the session, I used Canada Day there. But so you'd then ask your departments or your organization to start looking at their programs and align to that goal in that social area, right? So for me, those 4 just randomly chosen, for me, it seems natural that something like a community-wide celebration would score higher in this area than maybe election support or vehicle maintenance. And I know the scoring shows up something like a 0 to a 4, while your community-wide celebrations might get a 4 here, where your vehicle maintenance might get a 1 or a 0. Same application in your built capital area that showed up in Mark's work. So the goal might say community physical assets are built to maximize their return to citizens' well-being. Again, make that specific and unique so that you could recognize it as your own. But same 4 programs, I would suggest the roles might be reversed here and the scoring might look different. So something like vehicle maintenance and snow clearing might show up ranking higher than community-wide celebrations, because this would be, you know, making sure the longevity of your roads or something is important in that area. So vehicle maintenance is important, or snow clearing. All to say that you would do this with every one of your programs. And what ends up happening is that you get this list of programs with varying degrees of value in all of these areas. And like Mark was saying, this is not going to make the decision for you. However, when you do have to make tough decisions, it's powerful data to have, both at a department level and at a corporate level. So a department could go in and look at its programs in its area and decide where it needs to turn the dial up or down in programs to maximize that return. But then when you bring cumulative information together and, you know, you raise the decision-making process to an executive level or even a council, based on department recommendations, you still might have to go above or below the threshold that you have for revenue, but it'll all be done with some very robust set of data, again, trying to maximize that return of value to citizens, right? So Mark, I wonder if you could share a little bit of your thoughts on this slide, again, about that value conversation.
Well, I get all prickly about the word mining, of course, but you and I've been through this before.
It's very topical right now for Alberta.
Sounds like a chemical engineer's nightmare. But, this actually image is from the woman who did the story of stuff out of Seattle, and she uses illustrations to tell us a narrative, and I found this image quite interesting. It says, most of our world is focused on more stuff, more GDP, more growth, and as Robert Kennedy once said in 1968, he said in Kansas City, he says, these measures of progress fail to measure the joy of our children's play and the integrity of our politicians and the public discourse. And so this image of a pathway to better, I think, is a more, well, I would say more compelling, because I would use the word more than, but is as compelling as pursuing more economic growth for the sake of growth. And this is the question I would ask my business students, growth for what purpose? And as Kennedy said, we need to begin to measure the things that make life worthwhile, because we're not doing that as economists, as statisticians, right? And we can now. We can actually, all those little pieces there in that train track are attributes of well-being that we can now measure.
Well, and Mark, isn't it interesting and quite ironic that the places that have understood this better and that insatiable desire to grow, I mean, the conversation in our area right now is trying to attract investment, right, from global firms or international firms. And I know that we say this, and I've heard this a lot, about the quality of place is the biggest driver for that investment, right? So for me, it's, if you understand that better, this insatiable desire to, reduce taxes to drive growth, or, bring in that kind of investment. Every study that I've seen, or every set of data historically, would say that those that get this conversation reap the benefits of that growth that is the desire of all these strategies out there for growing
yeah
wealth, right?
Let me tell you just a brief story about the previous slide, because people like Kelly and I will get hired to do a cost benefit analysis, right, on public policy. So 3 years ago, myself and others were hired by the Alberta government to review the $1.2 billion affordable housing program. And the RFP said, conduct a cost benefit analysis. Now, I knew something that reality, as I understood, there were no cost benefit guidelines for Alberta, not when I was in Treasury in the 90s. So I checked with our friend John Rose from the City of Edmonton's chief economist. John, are there guidelines? He goes, not that I've ever seen. In fact, John says, 9 years as the chief economist of the City of Edmonton, I've yet to do a cost benefit analysis. So you see, you get this commission work, and it says, now what was it based on? It was based on the Auditor General's critique of the program, both not measuring the financial efficiency of the program, nor the effectiveness of the program. So economists hate the word effectiveness. They shy away. They'll defer to politicians to define effectiveness, or maybe engineers. Even engineers can't define effectiveness, I think. I'm not trying to get Chris off mute, but it's like, what is effectiveness? And I argued effectiveness to me is the well-being impacts experienced by low-income Albertans who benefit from affordable housing. Your cost of living is lower, your rent's lower, you got more money for food for your kids and less visits to the food bank. And can you measure all those things? Absolutely. So we presented a prototype which measured the well-being impacts experienced by a subset of those Albertans, developed a survey, and we got a quantitative well-being ROI, which showed that some of those beneficiaries experienced a 20% plus qualitative improvement in their life, including hope for their children, their employability potential. It was incredible. And the government went, what the heck is this? Like, this is really cool. I said, this is going to set precedent in public policy value accounting. And the Auditor General is doing a happy dance because, like, finally, we're going to measure value impact.
Well, hang on to that, Mark, because I know City of Edmonton has a new growth plan out there, and the numbers that I keep hearing that's thrown out there is just this: they expect that they're going to have 2 million people by 2050, and that's the only number that I'm hearing. Again, is just that growth. Well, growth. What kind of growth are we talking about, right? So hang on to that one. So to bring this to conclusion, because I really want to respect everyone's time and see if anybody has any questions at the end. Just the point, I will bring it back to our municipal audience in that we really feel that the last thing you should be doing is, again, that budgeting piece and all of this data, all of this, sorry for the term, mining for value that happens up front. That leads to really good decision making, again, around trying to drive that greatest well-being return that's possible, and then you budget at the very end. And just to share that this today, of course, March 18th, but there are upcoming sessions that will bring in the other pieces of our process. Those being strategic planning coming up, and then priority-based budgeting after that. And we've roughly spaced a month in between. I would hope that this was value add for everyone who participated today. And if there were any questions for Mark or myself or anybody in the room, I would open that up right now. But I would like to thank everyone for attending, and especially Mark for the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. That was fun.
I think there might be another chat question here. Let's see. So Kristen asks, it's a plan for population, not time horizon, and it does have a lot of these types of metrics in it. Oh, good to hear. But we'll need more granular data for, and I'm assuming Kristen might be involved with the City of Edmonton. And that was not meant as a dig with Edmonton, just kind of a rally the troops.
She's running for office.
Ah, there you go. Great stuff.
Yeah, I did a lot of the engagement stuff on City Plan. I'm not a staffer. I just was a very involved citizen.
I love involved citizens. Good luck.
Thank you.
So I don't know, does anyone else in the room, the familiar faces that I know, have any questions for Mark? I know you can kind of get them offline, but for the benefit of those who might see this video afterwards.
I just want to comment on Kristen's comment. I think if I can interpret it correctly, I worked on the End Poverty Edmonton evaluation framework, and yes, typically, 10% of our population is in need of affordable housing, for example. So we can do a much more forensic examination of their lives, their reality, because, and the distribution of well-being, there's always a distribution curve. And some of us, there's always going to be chronic level of mental illness. And so we know that there's a chronic demand, there's a chronic kind of level of people in different socioeconomic spectrums. So, but I think we need to be, maybe, I'm not saying we have to do a more forensic examination of their well-being conditions, but at least we need to examine, like, how do we move because the goal with the End Poverty Edmonton is we're going to move 10,000 people out of poverty. Well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Those who have transcended poverty, what was their secret? What was the pathway? What were the assets they had to build personally to transcend? And one of my favorite examples, Habitat for Humanity, which typically is transcending people out of poverty conditions with their mortgage model. So those are things as an economist I'm interested in, is how do we strengthen people's assets versus just keep focusing on the liabilities. And
Mark, to bring in our process, our whole enchilada, I know one of the improvements and evolution of priority-based budgeting is, and Chris touched on it earlier, some of these big societal goals that start coming up, like ending poverty, or I know it's on the radar of a lot of our council in Edmonton, is this affordable housing issue. And so when you get this holistic conversation about everything that you do, and I know Chris has done work at the community level too, to figure out where the assets lie. And you kind of have those conversations about not whose role it is, like get past whose role it is, like, is it the provincial government or the federal government? But when you look at goals that you want to achieve and the things that you can do to help achieve those goals, when that's the conversation, you might, even if it's not in your mandate, so to speak, you might still see the value and decide to do it anyway because of the return that you're going to get for your citizen. Because there's one citizen, right? The citizen doesn't really care how you fix that problem. They just want it fixed. And if you are there and you're wearing that well-being hat when you're making decisions, maybe mandate starts to go out the window and you see that value and make that decision, that courageous leadership decision, instead of it's not in my mandate decision.
I want a well-being 311 app on my phone, like we have in Edmonton. I think one of the greatest innovations ever that the city did was take a picture of the pothole that most irritates you, send it to our attention, and we will action it. And they actually show you when the pothole will be filled roughly. And sure enough, I did it in my back alley, and I couldn't believe it. Within a week, those little potholes, which would never be filled in a back alley in Edmonton, were filled.
One of the challenges with 311 is that there's a major equity gap. So when you look at the data of things like dangerous intersections and potholes and stuff, and you look at what's actually on the ground citywide, and then you look at where the complaints are coming from, they don't actually necessarily reflect the places of highest need, of course. And so, I mean, and I think that's where some of this work and your point about a well-being 311 is well taken. Also the need for the proactive work to go to where people actually are, and not just have them come to us, because it does tend to be, it can end up exacerbating inequities if we aren't proactive about that piece of it.
Thanks. I was trying to make a joke too. I was like, someone fill my happiness pothole, please.
Indeed.
Maria, you had a question. Your virtual hand was raised.
I did. Thanks, Chris. So for either Mark or Kelly, just curious, in your work in implementing some of this well-being and working with municipalities, what are you seeing are some of the accelerants for organizations actually considering this lens to put on their work?
I would say, thanks, Maria. I mean, the reason I get often hired is either someone needs to make a business case for their programs, and usually like nonprofits or kind of social enterprises, social services. So I'm getting commissioned by a First Nation to look at the devolution of family and child services, and they want me to look at it through a full cost accounting lens, right? But I'm going to do the well-being overlay as well. And federal government's interested in this question, Indigenous Services Canada, like how do we know the value of the transfer payments to First Nations is having an impact? And it gets into some really thorny issues is, does the Indian Act, does the Act even articulate accountability? or an aspiration of impact? No. So those are the kind of commission work that we get in terms of saying, well, how do we, I'll use the word business case. How do we make the business case value proposition for our program? And we now know that, well, I know we can do it. I mean, we're pioneering, so to speak, but every next project is going to just add, because people say, so where did this actually, where did this work? What were the long-term impacts? Did people maintain a well-being accounting system? And the honest answer is sometimes not. Sometimes they think, oh, we did it once, we're good. When do you want to do the survey again? When should we do it, Mark? Every 2 years, every 5 years, like census, every year? Actually, you can do it every year, and it doesn't cost very much. It takes 7 minutes to fill out the little survey, and or have it open all the time. Why wait 5 years for a census? So anyways, that's kind of the drivers I see in the market.
So Maria, for me, what I've seen is this is a time of constraint for a lot of municipalities. So they know that revenue source or those taxes or grants from the province, whatever the case may be, there's been constraint for their revenue. And in times of constraint, I think people reach out for ways to be a little bit more resilient or creative and innovative. So that opens the door for different ways of doing things. And I've also found that COVID, as much as it has really impacted everybody's lives in a lot of ways and negatively, it also has afforded this time for reflection and pause. And municipalities have seen some of the resilient things that they can do. And I think they're more open to what does being better look like on the other side of this? Like, what are the things that we're doing really well now that we want to keep doing? Or maybe what are the things that we did previously that weren't providing as much value as we thought? And we might want to think about reallocating that effort to something new. And the last thing that I'll say is I think that the public demanding or expecting better from government has never been stronger. So those kind of the three issues there that I see have kind of come together in a perfect storm, so to speak. And so I think there's a lot of appetite for, what does great governance look like going forward?
I also want to shout out for our female leaders, because a lot of this work, is coming from places like New Zealand or Iceland or Finland, where we have female leadership. And for whatever reason, I mean, it's funny that Kelly and I are the ones talking, but, women know, I think, a lot more about well-being and multitasking than men do, and men just fix stuff. And so there's something to be respected and honored. And I'm seeing that in First Nations, or kind of renewal of matrilineal wisdom traditions, which was basically destroyed or dampened by the colonizers' model, the accounting models that came from Britain. And so we got a lot of work to do, and but it's kind of exciting to see female leadership sort of carrying the day. And that's also true in finance. We have associate finance minister and a finance minister, both women. They're also quietly looking at this well-being budgeting idea, quietly, of course. As long as Trudeau's on the throne, probably not much will happen. Just kidding. I'll stop talking.
Good time to stop. So we're a little bit over time that we had, but I respect that and appreciative of everybody taking that time. One last time, Mark, thanks for sharing. I could listen to you hour after hour, and we probably will have times going forward, but just thanks everybody for taking the time, and hopefully there was some value add. And we hope to see you at the future sessions on strategic planning and priority-based budgeting, and be well, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, everybody. There's
Thanks, Chris.
phenomenal presentation.